There is a moment that comes to almost everyone, though most people never speak about it out loud. It arrives quietly, without warning, without drama. You might be standing in your kitchen in the early morning, holding a cup of something warm, watching the light shift slowly through the window. The house is still. The world outside has not yet begun its noise. And in that silence, something stirs inside you. Something you cannot name. Something that feels older than your current circumstances, deeper than your present routine. You go through the motions of the morning. You check your phone. You get dressed. You step into the day that looks almost exactly like yesterday and the day before that. And yet somewhere beneath the surface of all that ordinary movement, there is a voice. Not loud, not demanding, just present. And it whispers the same thing it has been whispering for months, maybe years. This is not everything you were made for. You have tried to quiet that voice. You have filled your schedule so that there is no room for it to breathe. You have told yourself that what you have is enough, that gratitude means accepting things exactly as they are, that wanting more is somehow ungrateful or proud. But the voice does not belong to pride. It does not belong to restlessness or ingratitude. That voice belongs to something far more sacred. It belongs to the part of you that God breathed into existence before you ever drew your first breath in this world. And it will not be silenced, because it was never meant to be. It was meant to be answered. You have built a life that looks reasonable from the outside. You have done what was expected. You have met obligations, honored commitments, shown up even when showing up cost you more than anyone around you knew. And still, at the end of certain days, you sit down and feel the weight of something unfinished. Not a project, not a goal, something deeper. A sense that there is a version of your life that has not yet been lived. A calling that has not yet been stepped into. A door that stands somewhere just beyond where you are right now, and you have been circling it for so long without walking through it that you have almost convinced yourself the door was never real. But it is real, and that is exactly why you are here today. You did not arrive at this moment by accident. Let that land in you for a second. You did not stumble into this message through some random sequence of digital coincidence. The God who numbered the hairs on your head. The God who knew your name before your parents chose it. The God who designed the exact contours of your calling long before you understood what a calling even was. That same God has been orchestrating the steps that led you here. Heaven did not send this message to a general audience. Heaven sent it to you, specifically, intentionally, with purpose that goes far beyond what you can see in this moment. You are a chosen one. And before you allow that phrase to pass through your mind without taking root, I need you to understand what it actually means. Because the world has diluted that word until it barely carries its original weight. Being chosen does not mean you are perfect. It does not mean you have never failed, never doubted, never sat in the dark wondering whether God had forgotten your address. Being chosen means that God looked across the entire landscape of time and possibility and decided that you, with all your history and all your complexity and all your quiet 3 a.m. questions, were exactly the one He wanted for the assignment He had in mind. That is not a small thing. That is everything. The life you have been living, the ordinary scenes, the routines that feel too small for the thing burning inside you, they were never the full story. They were the preparation. The quiet mornings were not wasted time. The seasons of waiting were not divine neglect. Every moment in which you kept going when stopping would have been so much easier. Every moment in which you chose to believe even when belief cost you something real, those moments were being recorded. Heaven has been watching, and what heaven has seen in you has not gone unnoticed. There is something remarkable about the way God chooses people. He does not choose the ones who have it all together. He does not wait until someone has resolved every contradiction in their life before deciding they are worthy of a divine assignment. He chooses people in the middle of their mess, in the middle of their uncertainty, in the middle of seasons that look from the outside like nothing significant is happening. He chose David while David was still out in the field watching sheep. He chose Moses while Moses was still on the backside of the desert, convinced that his best years were behind him. He chose people who looked ordinary from every external angle, because God never reads a person from the outside. God reads what is written on the inside, and what is written on the inside of you is something that qualifies you for more than you have dared to believe. That sense of unfinished purpose you have been carrying, that quiet ache for something more meaningful, something more aligned with who you actually are at your deepest level, that is not a character flaw. That is not spiritual immaturity. That is the signature of a chosen one who has not yet fully stepped into their anointing. It is the tension that exists in every person who was made for something specific, but has not yet fully arrived at it. And that tension, as uncomfortable as it has been, is one of the kindest things God has ever placed inside you, because it is the very thing that has kept you searching, kept you open, kept you from settling permanently into a version of your life that was never the whole picture. The dissatisfaction you have felt is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something is right. It is the evidence of a design that is still unfolding, a plan that is still being written, a story that has not yet reached its most important chapters. And you are standing right now at the threshold of one of those chapters. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb I knew you. Before you were born I set you apart." Read that again and let it settle into the deepest part of who you are. Before your parents held you, before your name was chosen, before any human being in your life had any knowledge of your existence, God knew you. And more than knowing you, He set you apart. That word, set apart, carries the weight of intentionality that most people never fully receive into their lives. You were not an afterthought. You were not assembled randomly and then assigned a purpose as an afterthought. You were known, designed, and set apart before your story on this earth even began. That means the ordinary morning in which you stood holding something warm, feeling the weight of an unfinished calling, was not a moment of spiritual failure. It was a moment of spiritual readiness. Because chosen ones who are ready to move into their next season often begin by feeling the gap between where they are and where they are called to be. That gap is not a wound. That gap is an invitation. You have been through things that other people around you do not fully understand. You have carried weights that were not distributed evenly. You have sat in rooms full of people and still felt a kind of aloneness that has nothing to do with the number of people present and everything to do with the sense that your frequency, your depth, your way of seeing the world does not match the surface-level conversations happening around you. That is not arrogance. That is the mark of someone whose capacity was built for a different dimension of living. Chosen ones often feel like strangers in ordinary spaces, not because they are better, but because they were built for something that ordinary spaces were never designed to contain. Heaven knows what you have walked through. Heaven knows the nights you held yourself together by the thinnest thread of faith. Heaven knows the prayers you prayed in rooms where no one else was watching. Heaven knows the tears did not let fall in public because you were busy being strong for everyone else. And heaven is saying to you today, with a clarity that bypasses every excuse and every layer of self-protection you have built up over the years, You passed. You are still here, and that alone is evidence of something divine working inside your life. If this message is reaching something real inside you, something that has been waiting to be recognized and called by its proper name, then pause for a moment and type 888 in the comments right now. Let it be your declaration. Let it be the moment you stop circling the door and start believing that you were always meant to walk through it. 888, written by your hand, is your agreement with heaven that you see what is being shown to you today, that you are not here by accident, that you are chosen, that the test you have been walking through was never going to end in your defeat, and that something is shifting right now, in this very moment, because heaven decided it was time for you to know the truth about who you are and what you were made to carry. The quiet life you were living was always the beginning, and the beginning, as it turns out, was exactly the right place to start. Something has already begun to move inside you, and you may not yet have the words for what it is. That stirring you felt in the previous moments, that recognition of a calling larger than your current circumstances, is not the beginning of something fragile. It is the surface of something ancient, something that was set in motion long before you arrived at this day. And now that the door of awareness has been opened, what comes next is not explanation. What comes next is deepening. Because chosen ones do not simply receive a title and walk forward unchanged. They are taken through a process, a refining, a proving, and that process, as uncomfortable as it can be, is the very thing that makes the anointing on their life unshakable. There is a man in Scripture whose story carries the weight of everything you have been feeling. His name is Joseph. And if you have ever felt misunderstood, overlooked, betrayed by people who should have protected you, or trapped in a season that made no sense given what you knew God had promised you, then Joseph's story is not just a historical account. It is a mirror held up to your own life, reflecting back to you the pattern of how God has always worked in the lives of those He has chosen, for something that the world around them could not yet comprehend. Joseph was a young man who carried something inside him that other people could feel but could not define. He was the kind of person whose presence unsettled the ordinary, not because he was trying to provoke anyone, but simply because the anointing on his life created a contrast that made those around him uncomfortable. He had dreams, not just the kind that come during sleep, but the kind that come from the deep place where God deposits vision into those He has called. And those dreams were not small. They were not polite. They did not shrink to fit the expectations of the people around him. They pointed to something that, from where Joseph was standing, seemed almost impossible to imagine becoming real. His brothers did not celebrate his dreams. They resented them. They looked at this young man who carried a different kind of light, and instead of being drawn toward it, they were threatened by it. And that is a pattern you may recognize from your own life. Because chosen ones rarely find that the people closest to them in their early seasons fully understand or affirm what God has placed inside them. The vision you carry, the sense of purpose that burns quietly in your chest, it is not always going to be welcomed by everyone in your immediate circle. That is not a sign that the vision is wrong. That it's a sign that the vision is real. Because things that are merely imagined do not provoke resistance. Only things that carry genuine spiritual weight cause the kind of reaction that Joseph's presence caused in the hearts of his brothers. They threw him into a pit. Read that again and feel the weight of it. This young man who had done nothing wrong, who had simply carried what God placed in him, with the kind of transparency that comes from not yet having learned to hide your light, was stripped of his coat and thrown into a hole in the ground by the very people who were supposed to be his family. And then, as if that were not enough, they sold him. They reduced the chosen one of God to a transaction. They put a price on what heaven had marked as priceless and handed him over to strangers heading for a foreign land. If you have ever felt like your worth was not recognized by the people who should have seen it most clearly, you are walking in the same valley that Joseph walked through. If you have ever felt like the very thing God placed in you became the reason someone in your life turned against you, you are carrying the same kind of anointing that provoked the same kind of opposition in the life of one of the most significant figures in all of Scripture. You are not being dramatic when you say that. Carrying your calling has cost you something. You are being accurate, and you are in extraordinary company. But here is what the pit could not do. It could not remove the dream from Joseph. It could not reach down into the deep place where God had deposited his purpose and pull it out. The brothers could take the coat. They could take his freedom. They could take him from everything familiar and everything he had known. But they could not take what was sealed inside him by the hand of God. And that is the word for you today. Whatever has been taken from you in the seasons of your life that felt most like betrayal and abandonment, whatever was stripped away by people who did not understand your value or by circumstances that speed contradict every you had promise you had ever received, there is something inside you, Sapro, that was never accessible to those forces. There is a sealed place in you where God's purpose lives, and it has survived everything that was designed to extinguish it. Joseph arrived in Egypt as a slave. That sentence should stop you for a moment, because everything in the natural world looked like defeat. Everything in the visible realm pointed to the conclusion that the dreams of this young man were delusions, that the God who supposedly gave him those visions had either forgotten him or abandoned him somewhere between the pit and the auction block. But the invisible realm told a completely different story, because even in slavery, the favor of God rested on Joseph in a way that could not be hidden. Even in a foreign land, in a house that was not his own, serving a master he had not chosen, the presence of God on his life created results that no circumstance of limitation could suppress. And then came the prison, because chosen ones, before they reach the palace, often spend time in places that look nothing like their destination. They spend time in spaces that feel so far removed from everything they were told. They were made for, that the distance itself becomes a test of whether they truly believe what they once declared they believed. The prison was not a detour from Joseph's story. The prison was part of Joseph's story. And the years he spent there were not wasted years. They were years of formation. Years in which the character was being built that would be necessary to carry the weight of what was coming. You cannot place a crown on a head that has not yet been shaped to bear it. And God, who knows the weight of what he is about to give you, is committed to the process of preparing you to carry it without being broken by it. What strikes me most about Joseph at the prison is not that he survived it. It is how he survived it. He did not become bitter. He did not allow the injustice of his situation to curdle into hatred toward God who had given him the dreams in the first place. He did not shut down the gift. When the cupbearer and the baker in that prison had dreams they could not interpret, Joseph, who had every reason to turn inward and protect himself from further disappointment, offered to help. He kept the gift flowing even in the place where the gift had not yet produced any visible reward for him personally. That is the mark of a chosen one who has moved beyond performing their purpose for applause and has settled into carrying their purpose as a way of life. And then in a single day, everything changed. Pharaoh had a dream, And the only person in all of Egypt who could interpret it was the man sitting in a prison cell who had been faithfully carrying a gift that his circumstances had never stopped him from using. In one moment, Joseph went from the prison to the palace, not because his circumstances finally caught up to his potential, but because God's timing had finally arrived at the moment that had been planned before Joseph ever drew breath. Genesis chapter 50 verse 20 says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done." That is the word spoken over your life today. Every hand that was raised against you, every door that was closed in your face, every season that felt like abandonment, every moment in which the people who should have believed in you chose instead to diminish you. God has been taking all of it and weaving it into something that your enemies never had the authority to cancel. What they meant as destruction, heaven has been rerouting into destiny. The pit was a passageway, the prison was a preparation, and the palace, which is the name for whatever God has been building toward in your life, is not further away because of what you have been through. It is closer because you are closer. Because the formation that happens in the painful places is precisely what qualifies you for the rooms that pain was preparing you to enter. You have been in a season that felt like the pit. You have been in moments that felt like the prison. And you are still here, still carrying the dream, still opening your hands to offer the gift, even in spaces where the gift has not yet been fully rewarded. That is not weakness. That is the posture of someone standing on the edge of their Joseph moment. The moment when everything that was used against you becomes the very credential that opens the door that no human hand could have opened on your behalf. The test you did not know you were taking began long before today, and the results are already in. You passed, not because you were perfect in every moment, but because you did not let go of the thing God placed in your hands, even when holding it cost you more than you thought you could bear. That is the evidence of a chosen one. And that evidence is written all over your story. The story of Joseph does not leave you at the prison gate. It follows you into the next room, the next season, the next layer of understanding about what it truly means to carry a calling that was authored by God rather than assembled by human ambition. And what that story reveals, more than anything else, is that the fire was never an accident. The fire was always part of the design. Because there are things that can only be produced in heat. There are qualities of character, depths of compassion, dimensions of wisdom that simply cannot be grown in comfortable soil. They require pressure. They require the kind of sustained difficulty that strips away everything artificial and leaves only what is genuinely real. And what is genuinely real in you, that unbreakable core that has survived every season of your life that was designed to undo you, is exactly what God has been after all along. You have been through fire, not the kind you can describe easily in polite conversation, not the kind that comes with obvious visible burns that other people can see and acknowledge and respond to with appropriate sympathy. The fire you have walked through has often been interior. It has been the fire of prolonged uncertainty, of waiting for a promise that seemed to be taking longer than made any rational sense. It has been the fire of watching people around you move forward into things that looked like success while you remained in a season that felt suspended, frozen, as though heaven had pressed pause on your life without explaining why or for how long. It has been the fire of loving people who did not love you back with the same quality of love you offered. It has been the fire of believing in a God who felt, in certain moments, strangely silent, strangely distant, strangely unhurried, given the urgency of what you were carrying inside. And in the middle of all of that fire, love was being tested. Not love as a warm feeling. Not love as the easy affection that flourishes when everything is going well, and the evidence of God's goodness is obvious, and the answers to prayer arrive promptly, and the path forward is clearly lit. That kind of love does not require much. That kind of love costs very little. The love that was being tested in your fire was something far more costly and far more rare. It was the love that chooses to remain even when remaining makes no logical sense. The love that says, I do not understand what is happening. I cannot see how this resolves. I am holding things inside me that I have not been able to share with anyone around me, and yet I am still here. I still believe. I have not walked away. That love, the love that endures through fire without requiring the fire to make immediate sense, that is the love that God has been looking for in you. And you gave it to Him in ways you may not have even recognized as significant in the moment you gave it to Him. Joseph understood this dimension of love because everything Joseph walked through, from the pit to the slave quarters to the prison cell, required him to maintain a quality of love toward God that could not be sustained by visible evidence alone. Think about what the visible evidence was telling Joseph during those years of his life. The visible evidence was telling him that his dreams were delusions. The visible evidence was telling him that his God was either absent or indifferent. The visible evidence, if he had allowed it to be the final word, would have driven him toward bitterness, toward abandonment of faith, toward the decision that the story he had been told about his own destiny was simply not true. But Joseph did not allow the visible evidence to be the final word. He held on to something that was deeper than what he could see, something that was older than his circumstances, something that burned inside him with a consistency that the prison walls could not extinguish. And that something was love. A love for the God who had given him the dream, even when the dream seemed to be buried under layers of impossibility. There is something about love that fire cannot destroy. And this is not poetry. This is the most practical spiritual reality you will ever encounter in your life as a chosen one. The enemy of your soul understands this reality, which is why he has invested so much energy in making your life uncomfortable. He is not trying to hurt you for the sake of hurting you. He is trying to break the love. He is trying to reach the place inside you where your devotion lives and apply enough pressure to cause it to crack, to cause you to finally declare that it is not worth it, that the cost of remaining faithful is higher than the reward, that you are done believing in a story that has taken this long to show results. Every difficult season you have walked through, every prolonged silence from heaven, every moment in which the circumstances of your life seemed to argue against the promises you had received, these were not random afflictions. They were targeted because the enemy is not interested in destroying ordinary people. He is interested in disqualifying chosen ones. And the way he attempts to disqualify you is by making the love too expensive to maintain. But you are still here, which means the love survived, which means every targeted assault on your faith accomplished exactly the opposite of what it was designed to accomplish. Instead of breaking the love, it proved the love. Instead of disqualifying you, it qualified you further. Because love that survives fire does not come out the other side diminished. It comes out refined, concentrated, more powerful than it was before it entered the heat. And the love you are carrying right now, after everything you have been through, is not the same love you started with. It is stronger, it is deeper, it is more anchored. It has roots that go down into places that comfort never could have reached. And that love is the very thing that heaven has been cultivating in you for this exact moment. Think about what it means to pass a test you did not even know you were taking. Because most of the significant tests in the life of a chosen one arrive without announcement. They do not come with a warning that says, "This is a season of testing. Adjust your expectations accordingly and prepare your heart for difficulty." They arrive looking like ordinary pain. They arrive looking like disappointment, like delay, like the kind of loss that does not come with an obvious redemptive explanation but attached. You do not get to see the scoring rubric in advance. You do not get to know what specific qualities are being assessed or how long the assessment will last. You simply find yourself in the middle of something hard, trying to hold together the pieces of a life that feels like it is being pulled in directions you did not choose. And you make the daily decision, sometimes the hourly decision, to keep believing anyway. That decision is the test, and every day you made it, you were passing. Joseph made that decision in the pit. He made it in the house of Potiphar. He made it when Potiphar's wife lied about him, and the consequences of her lie landed on him instead of her. He made it in the prison, day after day, year after year, in a space that offered no visible confirmation that the dreams of his youth were anything other than the wishful thinking of a boy who had not yet understood how the world actually worked. He made the decision to keep believing, to keep using the gift, to keep showing up as the person God had called him to be, even in a context that offered nothing in return. And in making that decision repeatedly, without fanfare, without external validation, without any visible sign that heaven was paying attention, he was passing a test that would one day be the credential that opened every door before him. Your repeated decisions to keep believing, to keep loving, to keep showing up in faith, when the circumstances offered you every reasonable excuse to stop, those decisions are your credential. They are the thing that is written about you in rooms you cannot see, in the spiritual realm where the activity that shapes your visible life is discussed and decided. You have been building a resume in the invisible world, and that resume reads in a way that makes heaven proud of what it sees in you. The fire you have walked through was not designed to destroy your love. It was designed to reveal it. And what the fire has revealed in you is something that the comfortable seasons never could have brought to the surface. It has revealed a love that is not conditional on outcomes, a love that is not dependent on answered prayers arriving on your preferred timeline, a love that chose to remain even when remaining required something you were not sure you had left to give. That quality of love is rare. That quality of love is precisely what God has been building in the chosen ones, who are being positioned for the next season of their lives, a season that requires the kind of trustworthiness that can only be demonstrated through exactly the kind of fire you have already walked through. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 7 says, "These trials are only to test your faith, to show that it is strong and pure. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, and your faith is far more precious to God than mere gold." Let that word land in the deepest part of who you are. Your faith, the very thing that has been under pressure, the very thing that the enemy targeted because he knew it was the source of your power, is described here not as something that was damaged by the fire, but as something that was purified by it. Gold does not become less valuable when it enters the fire. It becomes more valuable because the fire removes everything that was not gold to begin with and leaves only what is genuine and lasting and worth carrying forward. That is what has happened in you. The fire did not take anything real. It only removed what was not real. And what remains in you after everything you have been through is pure. It is tested, it is proven, and it is precious in the sight of the God who designed the entire process with your ultimate glorification in mind. You are not someone who barely survived. You are someone who was refined. There is an enormous difference between those two descriptions, and heaven wants you to understand that difference clearly today. Survivors often carry the marks of what they went through as wounds, as evidence of damage, as reminders of how close they came to not making it. But the refined carry their fire differently. They carry it as wisdom. They carry it as depth. They carry it as the kind of authority that can only be spoken by someone who has actually been in the place they are describing. When you open your mouth to speak truth into someone else's difficult season, you will not be speaking theoretically. You will be speaking from the inside of something you survived. And that quality of testimony carries a weight that no amount of academic training or comfortable living could ever produce. The love that was tested in your fire has passed, and because it passed, it is now ready to be used in ways that the untested version of that love never could have been. You are standing in a new place today, not because your circumstances have all resolved into comfortable clarity, but because something inside you has been established at a level that cannot be undone. The fire finished its work, and what it left behind is a chosen one whose love has been proven, whose faith has been refined, and whose next chapter is being written by a God who has seen everything and is satisfied with what he has found in you. You are still in this moment, still in this space where something has been shifting inside you, layer by layer, truth by truth, and what has been building in you through these last several sections is not going to be interrupted now. It is going to deepen. Because what comes next is not a departure from everything you have been receiving. It is an extension of it. It is the place where the spiritual truth you have been sitting inside connects to something that exists in the physical world. Something that was designed, whether its creators fully understood it or not, for people exactly like you. Here is something that the scientific community has been quietly uncovering for decades. Something that does not contradict what heaven has been saying about you, but actually confirms it from a completely different angle. Chosen ones carry a specific frequency. They always have. The ancient texts described it in the language of anointing, of fire, of the presence of God, resting on a person in a way that affected everything around them. But modern neuroscience has begun to map what that looks like inside the brain. And what researchers have found is both remarkable and deeply personal to everyone who has ever felt the weight of a calling they could not fully explain. The human brain operates across a range of frequencies, and most people, as they move through adulthood, settle into patterns that are dominated by the lower, slower frequencies associated with routine thinking, stress responses, and the kind of mental activity that keeps the surface of life functioning, but rarely touches the deeper creative and intuitive layers beneath. But there is a frequency that operates differently. Researchers call it gamma. And when they study the brains of people who are functioning at exceptional levels of creativity, insight, clarity, and what some scientists describe as breakthrough cognition, what they consistently find is an elevated presence of gamma wave activity, the eureka moments, the sudden clarity, the sense of knowing something before you can explain how you know it. These experiences are not random. They are the product of a brain that has been activated at its highest frequency. And chosen ones, people who were built for more than the ordinary rhythm of surface-level living, are wired for exactly that frequency. But there is a companion frequency that matters just as much, and perhaps even more in the context of everything you have been walking through. It is called theta. Theta waves operate at a slower rhythm, between 4 and 8 cycles per second, and they are associated with the deep pre-creative state, the intuitive channel, the place where learning happens effortlessly and where the connection between your conscious mind and the deeper layers of your awareness becomes fluid and open. Children live in theta almost constantly. That is why they learn languages without effort, why they absorb information at rates that adults can rarely match, why their creativity flows without the self-censoring filters that accumulate over years of being told to be realistic, to be practical, to stop dreaming so large. As people age, theta activity in the brain diminishes. The pressures of adult life, the accumulation of disappointment, the weight of responsibility, the relentless pace of modern existence, all of these push the brain away from theta and into frequencies that are more reactive, more defended, less open to the kind of deep receiving that makes extraordinary thinking possible. What this means for you is significant, because that sense of creative aliveness, that intuitive clarity, that ability to see connections that other people miss, and to carry a vision that operates beyond the ordinary bandwidth of conventional thinking. Those qualities were not manufactured by your effort. They were built into your original design. And the dimming of those qualities that you may have felt over the years of your adult life was not the permanent loss of something that was once yours. It was the suppression of something that was always yours, under layers of stress and conditioning, and the accumulated weight of seasons that were never meant to be carried alone. A neuroscientist named Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years studying exactly this problem. Trained at one of the most rigorous academic institutions in the world, with research connections that extended into programs developed, Dr. Rivers dedicated the core of his professional life to one central question. Why do some people operate at the full capacity of their mental and creative potential, while the majority of people, regardless of their intelligence or education or desire to grow, seem to function at only a fraction of what their brains were actually built to do? The answer he arrived at, after decades of research and thousands of hours of study, was not complicated. In fact, its simplicity is part of what makes it so powerful. The brain can be guided back to its highest frequency states, not through years of meditation practice, not through pharmaceutical intervention, not through the kind of disciplined mental training that requires skills most people do not have time to develop, but through precisely calibrated sound, through audio frequencies that speak directly to the brain in the language the brain already understands, the language of rhythm and resonance, the language of entrainment. When the brain is exposed to the right frequencies through sound, it does something remarkable. It synchronizes. It aligns itself with the incoming signal the way a tuning fork aligns with a matching frequency in its environment. And when it synchronizes with the frequencies associated with theta and gamma activity, the results are not subtle, they are transformative. This discovery became the foundation of what Dr. Rivers developed and what is now known as the Genius Wave, a 7-minute audio experience carefully engineered using a combination of binaural beats, isochronic tones, and precisely calculated sound frequencies designed to guide your brain back into the state it was always meant to operate in. 7 minutes. Not an hour of silent meditation requiring years of practice to access. Not a complicated protocol demanding special skills or spiritual disciplines you have not yet developed. 7 minutes of listening, with headphones if possible, allowing the sound to do what it was designed to do, which is to speak to your brain in its own language and invite it back to the frequency where your highest thinking, your deepest intuition, and your clearest creative vision naturally live. The connection between what this tool does and what you have been receiving spiritually today is not incidental. God works through the natural world as readily as He works through the supernatural. The same God who designed your calling also designed your brain. And if the frequency at which your brain operates is the difference between accessing the fullness of what you were made for and remaining in a dimmed, suppressed version of your capacity, then a tool that restores that frequency is not a distraction from your spiritual journey. It is a resource for it, because chosen ones who are stepping into their next seasons need every dimension of their design functioning at full capacity. The spiritual clarity, the creative vision, the intuitive knowing, the mental sharpness that allows them to steward the assignment God has entrusted to them with excellence and precision. And the people who have walked this path before you are not abstract statistics. They are real human beings whose lives shifted in measurable ways after using this tool consistently. Consider someone like a woman named Sarah, a single mother and elementary school teacher who had been carrying the quiet weight of feeling like her mind was moving through fog. She had the sense of something greater she was meant to contribute, but could not access the mental clarity to give it shape. After using the Genius Wave for 3 weeks, she described something she had not experienced in years. She said the fog lifted. She began writing the curriculum she had been trying to develop for 2 years and completed it in 11 days. Her relationships with her students deepened because she was finally present in the way she had always wanted to be but could not sustain. She reported sleeping more deeply, waking with ideas rather than anxiety, and feeling for the first time in a long time that the gap between who she was and who she was meant to be was actually closing. Or consider a man named Marcus, a mid-level manager in a logistics company who had been passed over for promotion 3 times and had begun to quietly accept that the ceiling he had hit was permanent. He started using the Genius Wave after a colleague mentioned it, more out of curiosity than genuine expectation. Within a month, he described a shift in how he was showing up in meetings. Ideas that had always felt just out of reach began arriving with clarity and confidence. He received a promotion 6 weeks after beginning consistent daily use. He was not a different person. He was a more fully activated version of the person he had always been. His brain was operating at a frequency that allowed what was always inside him to finally come through. More than 19,000 people have now used the Genius Wave, and the rate of those who asked for their money back sits below 4%. That is not a number that belongs to a product that makes promises it cannot keep. That is a number that belongs to something that actually delivers what it says it will deliver, for the overwhelming majority of people who give it a genuine opportunity to work. Now, before the details of how to access this are shared, something needs to be acknowledged honestly, because some of you are already doing the mental calculation and arriving at a number that gives you pause. $39 is not nothing, especially if you are in a season where every dollar is already spoken for before it arrives. That hesitation is completely valid. It is not a sign of lack of faith. It is a sign of being a responsible human being who has been through enough to know that not everything that promises transformation delivers it. But here is the honest question to sit with. What is the cost of remaining in the dimmed version of your capacity for another year? What is the cost of continuing to feel the gap between who you are and who you were designed to be without a practical tool to help close it? What has that cost you already in missed opportunities, in creative ideas that never fully formed, in the exhaustion of operating below the frequency you were built for? The $39 is not a purchase. It is an investment in the activation of what God already placed inside you. The regular price of the Genius Wave is $49, but through the link available in the pinned comment, and the description of this video, you can access it today for just $39. And every purchase comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee, which means you have 3 full months to experience what this tool does in your life. And if at the end of that time you do not feel that it delivered genuine value, you receive every dollar back without question or complication. One final thing before moving forward. There are imitation products that have appeared using similar language and similar packaging. Do not purchase from any source other than the single link in the pinned comment and the video description. That link is the only guaranteed access to the authentic product developed by Dr. Rivers and his research team. Any other source puts you at risk of receiving something that was not engineered with the precision that makes this tool work. And this offer, at the $39 price point, is not permanent. It reflects a limited window that will close, and when it closes, the standard price returns. If this message has resonated with you, if the connections between who God made you to be and the frequency your brain was designed to operate at feels real and worth pursuing, then the time to act on that is now. While the door is still open at this price, there is a breath that comes after the marketplace. A moment when the noise of transaction and invitation settles back into something quieter, something that does not demand anything from you, but simply holds space for what is already happening inside you. That breath is not a departure from everything that was just shared. It is the necessary pause that allows it to integrate, to move from the space of information and decision to the deeper space where truth becomes personal and personal becomes permanent. And it is in exactly that kind of quiet that God has always done his most significant work in the lives of the people he has chosen. Because here is what is true about chosen ones that the world around them rarely understands. The most important things that have ever happened in their lives did not happen in the loud moments. They did not happen on the stages, or in the rooms full of people, or in the seasons of obvious momentum and visible forward movement. The most important things happened in the silences, in the spaces between the noise, in the moments when everything external had gone quiet and there was nothing left to distract from the still, precise voice that has been speaking into the core of who they are since before they were born into this world. Those moments of sacred silence are not empty. They are the fullest moments of a chosen one's existence. They are the moments when heaven leans in closest, when the veil between the visible and invisible becomes thinnest, and when God speaks things into the interior of a person that no external voice could ever replicate or replace. Joseph knew this silence. After the pit, after the slave quarters, after the prison, there were hours and days and stretches of time in which the external world offered Joseph absolutely nothing to confirm that his story was moving anywhere meaningful. The silence between his arrival in Egypt and his standing before Pharaoh was not a brief inconvenience. It was years. Years of waking up in a context that had no visible connection to the dreams God had given him. Years of doing the work in front of him faithfully while carrying inside him a vision that the visible world gave him no reason to maintain. Years of listening to a silence that most people would have interpreted as divine abandonment, but that Joseph somehow understood as divine preparation. Because the silence was not the absence of God. The silence was the presence of God in a frequency that required stillness to receive. You have been in that silence. You know exactly what it feels like to be in a season where heaven seems to have gone quiet, where the prayers you are sending up seem to be dissolving into the air before they reach any destination, where the promises you received in earlier, clearer seasons seem like they belong to a version of your life that no longer exists. You know what it feels like to sit in the silence and not know whether to interpret it as testing or as punishment, as divine patience or as divine absence. And if you have been sitting in that silence recently, if you have been in one of those stretches where the spiritual atmosphere around you felt heavier than usual, and the clarity that once seemed to flow naturally has felt elusive and distant, then what is being spoken to you right now is this. The silence was not God leaving. The silence was God leaning in. There is a particular quality of communication that can only happen in the absence of noise. There are things that God wants to say to His chosen ones that cannot be heard over the sound of a busy life, over the constant input of voices and demands and digital stimulation that fills most modern days from the moment of waking to the moment of sleep. The depth of what heaven wants to deposit into you requires a kind of interior quietness that is almost countercultural in the world you are living in. And when God allows the external world to go quieter around you, when the season you are in strips away the distractions and the busyness and the noise that normally fills the spaces of your life, it is not cruelty. It is strategy. It is the deliberate creation of conditions in which you can finally hear the things that have been waiting to be said. Think about the moments in your own story when the most significant shifts happened inside you. Not the moments of outward success or visible momentum, though those have their place. Think about the interior shifts. The moments when something changed at the level of who you fundamentally understood yourself to be. Almost certainly, those moments happened in the quiet. They happened in the car with the music off. They happened at 3 in the morning when the rest of the house was sleeping and you were alone with your thoughts, and something broke open inside you in a way that you never fully planned for and could not have engineered by effort alone. They happened in the spaces between the noise, because the spaces between the noise are where God has always had the clearest access to the deepest parts of His chosen people. Joseph did not emerge from his years of silence unchanged. And this is critical to understand, because there is a temptation to view the silent seasons as neutral time, as holding patterns where nothing of real significance is occurring while you wait for the next visible development in your story. But silence is never neutral in the life of a chosen one. Silence is active. It is working at levels that the visible world cannot measure, and that you yourself may not be able to perceive while you are inside it. The formation that happened in Joseph during those years of obscurity was not incidental. It was essential. The wisdom he carried when he stood before Pharaoh was not the wisdom of a young man who had spent his early years in the comfort of his father's house. It was the wisdom of a man who had been through something, who had sat in the silence long enough to have the pretense stripped away, the performance stripped away, the ego stripped away, until what remained was simply the pure, unadorned, undecorated version of the person God had designed him to be. That is what the silence has been doing in you. It has been stripping away everything that was not essential. Every layer of performance that you had built up over the years to protect yourself from further disappointment. Every constructed identity that you wore in public, because the real version of you felt too vulnerable, too unfinished, too difficult to explain to people who were only equipped to understand you at the surface level. The silence has been working on you in the invisible places, removing what was not you, clarifying what was always you, preparing you to step into the next season, not as a polished performance of who you thought you were supposed to be, but as the actual, fully inhabited, deeply integrated person that God designed before you ever arrived in this world. And in that silence, God has been speaking something specific, not the general announcements that are broadcast to everyone, not the broad strokes of spiritual truth that apply to all of humanity equally. Something particular, something that has your name on it, something that addresses the specific shape of your calling, the specific nature of your assignment, the specific way in which your life is going to touch the lives of others, in a manner that no other person on this earth could replicate, because no other person on this earth was made the way you were made or walked through exactly what you have walked through, or carries the exact combination of and wounds and wisdom and experience that you carry. God speaks in the silence because the silence is the only place spacious enough to hold what He wants to say. The specific word He has for you is not a general broadcast. It is a personal conversation. And personal conversations require the kind of attentiveness that the noise of ordinary life makes almost impossible to sustain. So He quieted things around you. And in that quieting, He has been speaking. And even if you have not been able to hear it clearly, even if the words have felt more like impressions than articulations, more like a sense than a sentence, the communication has been happening. It has been landing in the deep place inside you, where God has always had direct access. And it has been changing you in ways that will only become fully visible when you step out of this season and look back at who you were when you entered it. There is a particular kind of confirmation that comes after a long silence. It is different from the confirmations that arrive quickly, the ones that feel like immediate divine response to immediate prayer. Those are beautiful and necessary, but there is a deeper confirmation, a more settled confirmation, a confirmation that arrives after you have waited long enough in the silence to have given up every version of your own agenda for how the confirmation was supposed to look. That confirmation arrives not as excitement, but as peace. A peace that does not require your circumstances to be resolved before it can be present. A peace that exists independently of whether the visible world has caught up to the invisible promise. A peace that feels, to those who have never experienced it, like inexplicable calm in the middle of circumstances that should produce anything but calm. That is the peace that has been growing in you through the silence. And it is not a passive peace. It is not the peace of someone who has given up or gone numb, or decided that it is easier to stop expecting anything than to keep hoping for something. It is the active, anchored, unshakable peace of someone who has been in the silence long enough to know from the inside that the silence was never abandonment. It was appointment. It was the deliberate creation of the interior conditions necessary for the next chapter of your life to begin in a way that will actually last. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 15 says, "In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength." Your strength has been growing in the quietness, not despite it, not after it, in it. The silence was not the pause before your strength returned. The silence was the environment in which your strength was being built at a depth that the noise never could have reached. You are coming out of this season, not depleted but fortified, not diminished but expanded, not the same person who entered the silence, but a more fully formed, more deeply rooted, more completely prepared version of the chosen. One that God always knew you were capable of becoming. The next chapter does not begin when the silence ends. The next chapter began inside the silence, and you are already living in it. Even if the visible world has not yet caught up to what has been happening in the invisible one. That is the nature of chosen ones. They are always living in the next thing before the next thing is fully visible. They carry the future inside them before the future has arrived. And that is not confusion. That is calling. That is the evidence of a God who works from the inside out, who deposits the destination before he reveals the road, who places the answer inside the person before he shows them the question they were designed to answer. You are ready for what comes next. Not because everything has been resolved, not because every question has been answered, or every wound has been fully healed, or every promise has been visibly fulfilled. You are ready because the silence did its work, because love was tested and passed, because the fire refined rather than destroyed, because the chosen one who arrived at the beginning of this message and the chosen one who is receiving these words right now are not the same person in the same place. Something has shifted. Something has been established. And what has been established in you through everything you have walked through cannot be undone by anything that comes next. What has been building inside you through every word of this message is not meant to stay inside you. That is the thing about light that most people misunderstand. They receive it and they hold it carefully, protectively, as though sharing it might somehow diminish what they have been given. But light does not work that way. Light multiplies through distribution. It does not decrease when it is passed from one hand to another. It expands. It reaches further. It touches places that the original source could never have reached alone. And that is precisely why you are here today. Not only to receive what heaven has been pouring into you through this message, but to become a carrier of it into spaces and lives that are still sitting in the dark, still waiting for something real to break through the noise of their ordinary days, and speak to the part of them that has always known there was more. You are the living proof. Let that phrase settle into you for a moment without deflecting it or qualifying it, or immediately looking for reasons why it does not apply to you. You are the living proof. Your survival is not a lucky accident. Your continued presence in this journey, your willingness to keep showing up in faith, even through the seasons that gave you every reasonable excuse to stop, your choice to remain open to a message like this one, when the easier path would have been to scroll past and stay safely inside the familiar walls of the life you have already built. All of that is evidence of something divine working inside your story. And evidence is meant to be seen. Testimony is meant to be shared. The story that God has been writing in your life through every trial and every silence and every moment of fire and every unexpected breakthrough is not a private document. It is a public witness. And the world around you, the specific people in your specific sphere of influence, the ones who are connected to you through every digital thread and every real-world relationship, they need to see what God has been doing in a life like yours. Joseph did not keep his story to himself. When the moment came for him to stand before his brothers, the very people who had thrown him into the pit and sold him into slavery, he did not use his position of power to exact the revenge that the human part of him would have been entirely justified in pursuing. He used it to testify. He looked at the people who had done him the most harm, and he said something that could only have been spoken by someone who had been in the silence long enough to understand the larger architecture of what God had been doing through everything that looked like disaster. He said that what they intended for evil, God intended for good. That sentence is not the product of a man who had simply managed to survive his suffering with his bitterness intact. That sentence is the product of a man who had been so thoroughly transformed by the process he walked through that he could look at the worst chapters of his story and see the hand of God working through every single one of them. That kind of testimony is what the world is far for right now. Not the polished, curated version of spiritual life that presents only the victories and edits out the struggle. Not the highlight reel that leaves other people feeling more alone in their difficulty, because everyone around them seems to be living a version of faith that never costs anything, or hurts anything, or requires the kind of sustained endurance that real life actually demands. The world is starving for the testimony that says, "I was in the pit and I came out. I was in the prison and I did not lose the dream. I walked through fire and the love survived. I sat in the silence and it was not empty. I passed a test I did not know I was taking, and I am standing here today as the evidence that God finishes what He starts in the lives of the people He has chosen." That is your testimony. Not a future testimony that you are still waiting to be qualified to share. A present testimony, built from the accumulated weight of everything you have already been through, and everything you have already chosen, and everything you have already survived. You are already the evidence. You are already the proof. And the sharing of that proof is one of the most significant things you can do with the life that God has entrusted to you in this season. This community exists as a space where that kind of testimony is welcomed and honored and taken seriously. Not as a platform for performance, not as a stage for the projection of a spiritual image that has been carefully constructed to impress people who are watching, but as a genuine gathering of chosen ones who are walking through real things and need to know that they are not walking alone. Every person who watches this message and feels something stir inside them is not a passive audience member. They are a potential carrier of the same light that has been growing in you through every difficult season you have walked through. And when you share this message with someone in your life who needs to hear it, when you pass it along to the person who has been struggling in silence and has not yet found language for what they are experiencing, you are not simply doing a favor for a YouTube channel. You are participating in the expansion of something that heaven is building through the connected stories of chosen ones who are finally beginning to understand who they are and what they were made to carry. So, if this message has reached something real in you today, something that felt like recognition rather than new information, something that resonated at a level deeper than the intellectual, then let that resonance move you to action. Not as an obligation, not because anyone is requiring anything from you, but because the most natural response to receiving something genuinely valuable is the desire to make sure that the people you care about have access to the same thing. Like this video. Not as a mechanical gesture, but as a declaration that what was shared here today was worth affirming. Share it with someone specific. Not a general broadcast into the void of your social media presence, but a deliberate, intentional sending of this message to the face that came to your mind while you were listening. The person whose name surfaced somewhere in the middle of what was being said because something told you they needed to hear exactly this. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because this message is not the only one. There is a consistent flow of content being created here for people exactly like you. Chosen ones who are navigating the complexity of living a called life in a world that does not always understand or accommodate what it means to carry something divine. Every new message that comes through this channel is another opportunity to receive, another piece of the larger picture that heaven is assembling through the stories and truths and testimonies that are shared in this space. Staying connected to that flow means you do not miss the word that was made specifically for the next season you are about to enter. And chosen ones who are moving into new seasons need the kind of consistent, substantive spiritual nourishment that does not thin out or compromise what it is trying to say in order to appeal to the widest possible audience. There is also a way to go deeper in your support of what is being built here. for those who feel moved to do so. In the pinned comment and in the description of this video, you will find a link that allows you to contribute to the work of creating these messages. Every resource that comes through that link goes directly back into the effort of producing content that reaches chosen ones in the moments when they need it most. The people who have found this channel in their darkest seasons, who have sat alone with something playing in the background while they tried to hold themselves together, and found that the words being spoken reached them in a place that nothing else had been able to touch. Those people are the reason this work continues. And if you feel the desire to be part of sustaining that, to be part of ensuring that the next person who needs this message is able to find it, then the link in the description and the pinned comment is how you do that. No amount is too small. Every contribution is an act of partnership in something that is larger than any single person or any single message. Because what is being built here is not a media operation. It is a community of chosen ones who are finding each other through the stories that connect them, through the shared experience of having carried something that the world around them could not fully see, through the mutual recognition that happens when a chosen one encounters another chosen one and understands, without needing extensive explanation, what the other person has been through. That community is real. It is growing, and every person who shares this message, every person who chooses to remain connected through a subscription, every person who chooses to contribute through the donation link, is making the community larger and more capable of reaching chosen ones who are still out there in the silence, still waiting for someone to tell them that what they have been feeling is not delusion, but destiny. Think about where you were when you first encountered a message that spoke to something real inside you. Think about the moment when words reached you in a place that felt unreachable, when something you heard or read or watched broke through the protective layers you had built up over years of disappointment and spoke directly to the part of you that was still, underneath everything, holding on. Someone made that possible. Someone created that content, shared that message, built that space where that encounter could happen. And someone before them shared it. And someone before them contributed to its reach. And the chain of chosen ones choosing to pass the light forward is how it arrived in your life at exactly the moment you needed it. You are now a link in that chain, not by obligation, by calling. Because the chosen ones who receive the light and refuse to let it stop with them are the ones through whom heaven expands its reach into the darkest corners of a world that is desperately in need of exactly what you now carry. The testimony of your survival, the evidence of your love having passed the test, the proof that the silence was not abandonment, the living demonstration that God finishes what He starts in the lives of the people He has chosen. Share the light, subscribe to the flow, give if you feel called to give, and know that every one of those actions, however small they may seem from the outside, is participating in something that heaven considers significant. Because chosen ones who use their influence to point other people toward truth are doing the work that the kingdom was always designed to be built through. Not through the powerful alone, not through the platforms with the largest numbers, but through ordinary chosen ones who decided that what they received was too important to keep to themselves and too valuable to let die with them. You are that person. You have always been that person, and the world around you is waiting for you to fully step into it. There is a reward on the other side of everything you have been through, not a consolation prize, not the kind of reward that is handed to someone simply for enduring, as though survival alone were the full measure of what your journey has produced. What is waiting for you on the other side of the trial you have walked through is something far more substantial, far more tailored, far more specific to the exact nature of what you carried and how you carried it than anything that could be described as mere compensation for difficulty. The reward that God has been building toward in your life has the shape of your calling. It has the dimensions of your gifting. It has the texture of every season you walked through and every decision you made to keep going when stopping would have been so much easier. It was not assembled generically and handed to you because you checked a sufficient number of boxes on a spiritual endurance checklist. It was crafted, specifically, with the kind of intentionality that only a God who knows you completely could bring to the construction of something that was always meant to fit you and only you. Joseph discovered this on the day everything changed. And what is striking about that day, what deserves more attention than it usually receives in the telling of his story, is not the dramatic nature of the reversal. It is the precision of it. When Pharaoh pulled Joseph out of the prison and stood him in the throne room and gave him authority over all of Egypt, the reward that Joseph received was not simply power or position or the resolution of his material circumstances. The reward was the specific deployment of every single thing that had been built into him through every season he had walked through. The years in the pit had taught him what it felt like to be at the bottom, which made him a leader who never forgot where people could end up when systems failed them. The years in Potiphar's house had taught him how to manage complexity and serve excellently in a context that was not his own, which made him an administrator of extraordinary competence. The years in prison had taught him how to maintain integrity and use his gifts without requiring recognition or reward, which made him a man of character that power could not corrupt. Every single piece of what Joseph had been through was present in the reward he received, not as a wound that he had learned to manage, not as baggage that he carried despite his success, but as the very substance of the wisdom and capacity that made him uniquely qualified to do what no one else in Egypt could do in that specific moment of history. The reward was not separate from the trial. The reward was built from the trial. It was constructed out of the same material as the suffering, transformed by the hands of God into something that served just Joseph, but an entire generation of people whose survival depended on the wisdom that had been forged in him through the fire. This is the pattern that runs through the life of every chosen one who has ever walked through something significant and come out the other side carrying more than they went in with. The reward is never disconnected from the process. It is always, in some profound and unmistakable way, the product of the process, which means that the things you lost in your trial, the things that were stripped away, the things that the fire consumed, were not simply taken from you. They were exchanged. Because God does not take from his chosen ones without replacing what was taken with something that could only have been received through the experience of the loss. What left you in the fire was not simply gone. It was transformed. And what was transformed is now part of the reward that is being assembled with your name on it. Think about what you know now that you did not know before the hardest seasons of your life began. Think about the depth of compassion you carry for other people who are struggling. A compassion that you could not have manufactured by decision or discipline, because it had to be grown through personal acquaintance with suffering. Think about the clarity you have about what actually matters, the kind of clarity that cannot be taught in a classroom or absorbed from a book, but can only be arrived at by walking through enough difficult seasons to have everything non-essential burned away by the fire of genuine difficulty. Think about the resilience that lives in you now, the settled, quiet, unshakable resilience of someone who has been in places that looked like the end of the story and discovered from the inside that they were not the end, but the turning point. All of that is yours. All of that is the reward that the trial has been building in you, layer by layer, season by season, through every moment that cost you something real. And here is what needs to be understood about the reward that chosen ones carry after walking through fire. It is not only for them. It was never only for them. The depth of wisdom that Joseph accumulated through his years of suffering was not given to him for the purpose of making Joseph comfortable in his later years. It was given to him because there were millions of people who were going to need exactly that wisdom applied with exactly that precision at exactly that moment in history. The reward that God builds through the suffering of his chosen ones always has a dimension that extends beyond the individual who received it. It carries within it the seeds of something that is meant to be released into the lives of others. The transformation that happened in you through the fire is not a private treasure to be kept behind glass and admired in solitude. It is a living resource that is meant to flow outward, to touch other lives, to bring the kind of help that only comes from someone who has actually been through the thing they are speaking about. You have things inside you right now, things that were built through your hardest seasons that other people desperately need. Not the polished, curated version of your experience, but the real, unedited, honest account of what it looked like to walk through the fire without losing the love, to sit in the silence without losing the faith, to carry the dream through the prison without allowing the prison to become the final definition of your story. That testimony carries a specific kind of authority that nothing else can replicate. It is the authority of someone who speaks from the inside of something rather than the outside of it. And people who are currently inside their own fire can tell the difference immediately. They can feel when they are being spoken to by someone who has genuinely been where they are. And that feeling of being truly understood by someone who truly knows is one of the most healing experiences a human being can have. The reward is also relational, because chosen ones who walk through fire and come out refined carry with them a quality of presence that changes the atmosphere of the spaces they enter. You have been in rooms with people like this. You know what it feels like to be near someone who has been through something real and been transformed by it rather than simply surviving it with their bitterness intact. There is a quality of peace that radiates from people like that, a quality of depth, a quality of groundedness that does not require the external circumstances to be perfectly arranged before it can be present. That quality is not a personality trait. It is a spiritual reality. It is the product of a person who has been in the fire and been changed by it at the most fundamental level of who they are. And you are becoming that person. You are in the process of becoming the presence in other people's lives that you yourself have needed in your most difficult seasons. Chosen ones who carry their reward well, who steward it with the same faithfulness they showed in the trial, become generational forces. Not in the sense of fame or platform or visible influence, though those things sometimes accompany the calling, but in the sense that what they carry gets transferred into the people around them, and what gets transferred into the people around them gets carried forward into the next generation. And the wisdom and depth and love that was forged in one person's fire becomes the inheritance of people who were not even born yet when the fire was burning. Joseph's reward was not just about Joseph and his brothers and the people of Egypt who ate because of his wisdom during the famine. Joseph's reward echoed forward through time. The generations who came after him were shaped by the choices he made and the character he maintained through the years of his suffering. And your reward carries the same potential. What you are becoming through this process is not just for your own benefit. It is an inheritance for people who will come after you, people who will be shaped by the choices you make now and the character you maintain through the seasons of difficulty that qualified you for what you are about to step into. Nahum chapter 1 verse 7 says, "The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who take refuge in him." He knows you, not in the general sense in which a creator is aware of the existence of what he created. He knows you in the specific, personal, detailed sense. That means he is aware of every dimension of what you have been through, every day of the trial, every moment of the silence, every night in which you chose to take refuge in him when the circumstances gave you every reason to look for refuge somewhere else. He has seen all of it. He has been present for all of it. And his goodness, which is not contingent on your circumstances being comfortable, or your questions being answered, or your timing preferences being honored. His goodness has been working through all of it toward the reward that he determined before the trial began was worth everything the trial was going to cost you. The reward is real. It is specific. It has your name on it, and it is closer than it has ever been, because you are closer than you have ever been to the person you were always designed to become. The trial is not taking you away from the reward. The trial is taking you toward it, step by step, season by season, through every moment of endurance, and every act of faithfulness, and every day of choosing to believe in a God whose goodness does not always announce itself loudly, but never, not for a single moment, stops working on behalf of the chosen ones who have placed their trust in him. What is being built for you is worth everything it cost you to get here, and you are about to find out just how true that is. Everything that has been spoken into you through this message has been moving towards something, not toward a conclusion, not toward a tidy resolution that wraps the story in language clean enough to feel finished, but toward an activation. A moment in which everything that has been deposited into the interior of who you are begins to move from the realm of received truth into the realm of lived reality. Because chosen ones do not simply accumulate spiritual understanding as though it were a collection of beautiful ideas to be admired from a safe distance. They are transformed by what they receive. They are changed at the level of identity, at the level of how they move through the world, at the level of what they believe is possible for their lives when the God who designed them is the one authoring the next chapter. And that transformation, the real kind, the kind that does not fade when the emotional intensity of a moment passes, and ordinary life reasserts itself in all its demanding transformation is built on a foundation of identity that cannot be shaken by anything the world throws at it. Joseph understood the unshakable nature of the identity that God places in a person, and what makes his understanding so remarkable is the specific moment in which it was most clearly demonstrated, because the moment that revealed the depth of his identity was not the moment he stood before Pharaoh. It was not the moment of visible vindication. The moment when the reward arrived in unmistakable, public, irrefutable form. The moment that revealed who Joseph truly was happened much earlier, in a much smaller room with a much smaller audience. It happened in the house of Potiphar, when Potiphar's wife reached for him and offered him something that, from the outside, looked like the one thing a man in his position might have been tempted to take. Not just physical temptation, though that was real, but the temptation of comfort, the temptation of a momentary reprieve from the reality of being a slave in a foreign land. The temptation of allowing the circumstances of his life to define the boundaries of what he permitted himself to do and be. Joseph refused, not because refusing was easy, not because the cost of refusing was small. He refused because he knew who he was at a level that his circumstances had not been able to reach. He was a slave in the eyes of the world around him. He was property, to be bought and sold and housed and fed at the discretion of someone else. Every external marker of his identity had been stripped away: the coat, the family, the homeland, the freedom, the status. Everything that the world typically uses to tell a person who they are had been removed from Joseph's life with a thoroughness that would have dismantled the identity of almost anyone else. But there was something in Joseph that the stripping could not reach. There was a core of knowing, a settled, unargued, unperformative knowing of who he was in relation to the God who had made him, that existed completely independently of everything his external circumstances were saying about him. That is the identity that cannot be stolen. Not the identity that is constructed from external validations and sustained by the ongoing approval of the people around you. Not the identity that requires your circumstances to be arranged in a particular way before it can feel secure and whole. The identity that cannot be stolen is the one that was placed in you by the God who made you, before the world had a chance to tell you who you were or were not. Before the losses came and the betrayals came and the long silences came. Before any of the things that have tried to rewrite your self-understanding had the opportunity to do their work on you. That identity was sealed. It was placed inside you in a location that is not accessible to the forces that have tried to reach it. And everything that has been trying to make you forget it, every voice that has whispered that you are too broken, too ordinary, too far gone, too deeply flawed to be the person that God originally designed. Every one of those voices has been speaking to a version of you that does not actually exist. Because the real version of you, the version that was known before the foundation of the world, the version that was set apart before birth, the version that carries the sealed purpose that no pit and no prison and no prolonged silence could ever extract, that version of you has never been in danger. That version of you has never been diminished by what you walked through. That version of you has been present through every single moment of your story, sometimes buried under layers of pain and confusion and accumulated disappointment, but never absent, never revoked, never canceled by anything that happened to you, or anything that you did, or anything that was done to you by people who did not understand your value. You are still the chosen one you were before the hardest seasons came. You are still the carrier of the dream that God deposited in you before the world had a chance to tell you that people like you do not get to carry dreams like that. You are still the person that heaven set apart and breathed purpose into and designed for an assignment that only you can fulfill. Nothing that has happened in the interval between the beginning of your story and this present moment has changed that fundamental reality. The only thing that has changed is the depth of the formation, the degree of the refining, the extent to which the fire has burned away everything that was not essential and left behind something that is pure and tested and ready to be fully deployed. The enemy knows this, and this is why the attacks on your identity have been so persistent and so targeted, because the enemy understands something that chosen ones sometimes forget in the middle of their most difficult seasons. He understands that a chosen one who knows who they are is unstoppable. A chosen one who has settled at the deepest level of their interior life into the unshakable knowing of their identity in God is not someone who can be defeated by circumstance or discouraged by opposition, or derailed by the voices that tell them they are not enough. The only way to neutralize a chosen one is to make them forget who they are. To create enough confusion, enough pain, enough prolonged silence, enough accumulated evidence that the world around them does not see their value, that they begin to accept a diminished version of their own identity as the accurate one. But you are here today, which means the strategy failed, which means that through everything that was designed to make you forget, something in you remembered. Something in you held on to the knowing even when the knowing felt more like a faint impression than a clear declaration. Something in you refused to fully accept the diminished version of your story that the enemy was trying to write over the top of the one God had authored. And that refusal, however quiet it was, however unannounced, however much it looked from the outside like simply surviving rather than actively resisting, was an act of profound spiritual courage. It was the evidence of an identity that could not be stolen because it was never held in a place that was sell to the one who was trying to take it. Your identity is not a conclusion you arrived at through an analysis of your performance. It is not a reward you earned through a sufficient number of correct spiritual decisions. It is not contingent on how well your life is currently going, or how clearly you can see the path forward, or how recently you last felt the unmistakable presence of God in a way that left no room for doubt. Your identity as a chosen one is a covenant reality. It was established before your behavior had any bearing on it. It was secured before you had the opportunity to either strengthen or compromise it. And it is maintained not by your consistency, but by the faithfulness of the God who declared it over you before you ever drew breath in this world. That covenant reality is what Joseph was standing in when he refused what Potiphar's wife offered him. He was not standing in a feeling of spiritual superiority. He was not standing in a season of obvious divine blessing that made faithfulness easy. He was standing in the covenant knowing of who he was in relation to the God who had given him the dreams, and that knowing was more real to him in that moment than anything his circumstances were presenting as an alternative. That is the kind of identity that chosen ones are being called into in this season. Not the performance of spiritual confidence, not the projection of an image of unshakable faith that is carefully maintained for the benefit of an audience, but the quiet, deep, interior settlement into the truth of who you are that does not require any external confirmation to remain stable. Right now, in this moment, let that truth land in you without deflection or qualification. You are chosen. You are set apart. You are loved with the kind of love that does not fluctuate based on your performance or your circumstances or your most recent failure. You are carrying something inside you that was placed there by the hands of God and sealed against every force that has ever tried to extract it. And you are standing in this moment, having walked through everything you have walked through, as the living evidence that the identity God places in His chosen ones cannot be stolen, cannot be revoked, cannot be diminished by anything that this world or the enemy of your soul has ever attempted to bring against you. If that truth is landing somewhere real inside you right now, if you feel something shifting in the deep place where your understanding of yourself lives, type the words "I'm chosen" in the comments below. Not as a performance, not as a declaration made for the benefit of anyone watching, but as an agreement between you and heaven, a moment in which you align your voice with what God has been saying about you since before the world began. Because there is something that happens when a chosen one opens their mouth and speaks their identity out loud, when they take the covenant truth that has been living quietly in the interior and give it external expression, even in the small form of 4 words typed into a comment section. It is an act of possession. It is the moment when what you have received becomes what you have declared, and declarations made in alignment with heaven carry a weight that shifts things in the invisible realm in ways that begin to show up in the visible one. Psalm chapter 139, verse 14 says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Know it full well today, not partially, not tentatively, not with the hesitation of someone who has been told too many times, by too many voices in too many difficult seasons, that they were less than what this verse declares them to be. Know it full well. You are the wonderful work of a God who does not make mistakes. You are the fearfully designed creation of a Creator who built into you exactly what was needed for the assignment He had in mind before you arrived. And everything that has tried to make you doubt that, everything that has tried to insert an asterisk after the declaration of your worth and your chosenness and your divine design, was operating without authority. It was speaking outside its jurisdiction, because the jurisdiction over your identity belongs to the one who created it. And He has never, not for a single moment of your existence, revised His assessment of your worth or reconsidered His decision to choose you. You are chosen. You have always been chosen. And nothing that has ever happened in the space between the beginning of your story and this present moment has changed that. The love that was tested in the fire does not come back the same. This is one of the most important truths that chosen ones carry out of the seasons that cost them the most. And it is a truth that the comfortable version of faith never fully grasps because it cannot be understood from the outside of suffering. It can only be understood from the inside of it, by someone who has actually been in the place where love was asked to survive without the support of visible evidence, without the encouragement of immediate answers, without the comfort of circumstances that confirmed the goodness of the God being loved. That kind of love, the kind that chooses to remain in the absence of every external reason to remain, does not emerge from the fire unchanged. It emerges transformed, and the transformation it carries is not subtle. It is not a minor adjustment to the temperature of an affection that was already present. It is a fundamental shift in the nature of the love itself, a shift that makes what comes out of the fire category different from what went in. Joseph understood this from a place of personal, lived experience that goes deeper than any theological framework could capture. Because when the moment came for Joseph to stand before the brothers who had thrown him into the pit and sold him into slavery, the love that he expressed toward them was not the love he had carried as a young man before the trials began. That earlier love, genuine as it was the love of someone who had not yet been tested, someone who had not yet discovered what love looked like when it was asked to survive the most comprehensive, stripping away of everything that makes loving feel safe and reasonable and reciprocally rewarding. The love that Joseph expressed in that moment of reunion, the love that looked at the faces of the people who had done him the most harm and chose forgiveness over revenge, reconciliation over retribution, restoration over the settling of accounts. That love had been forged in the fire. It had been refined through years of carrying a commitment to the God who gave him his dreams, even when those dreams seemed to have been permanently buried under the weight of everything his brothers had set in motion. And what came out of that fire was a love so expanded, so deepened, so fundamentally different in its capacity and its reach that it was able to accomplish what the original version of that love could never have managed. The love that survives the fire becomes capable of things that untested love cannot do. It becomes capable of forgiving at a depth that moves beyond the surface-level release of offense into the kind of complete, generous, structurally sound forgiveness that actually rebuilds what was broken. It becomes capable of seeing the larger story operating behind the painful chapter. The way Joseph was able to see the hand of God working through the betrayal of his brothers towards something that neither he nor they could have engineered through their own wisdom or effort. It becomes capable of releasing the people who caused the pain from the debt they accumulated in causing it. Not because the debt was not real, but because the love that survived the fire has grown large enough to absorb the debt without requiring repayment. That is not weakness. That is the most radical form of spiritual strength that exists. And it is only available to the ones who have been through enough to have their love genuinely tested and have come out the other side still choosing to love. Your love has been through that fire, and what is emerging from it in this season is something that has more capacity than what you began with. More reach, more depth, more ability to touch our lives at a level that the comfortable version of your love, the version that existed before the trials came, could not have accessed. Because the people who need what you carry are not primarily the people whose lives are going well and whose faith is easy and whose circumstances are arranged in a way that makes believing feel natural and sustainable. The people who most need what you carry are the ones who are in the middle of their own fire right now, the ones who are sitting in their own silence and wondering whether the love they are trying to maintain has any foundation solid enough to survive what it is being asked to survive. And the only person who can reach them in that specific place is someone who has been in that specific place. Someone who speaks about the fire not as a theological concept, but as a personal geography. Someone whose voice carries the particular quality of authority that belongs exclusively to those who have genuinely been through the thing they are describing. That is who you are. That is what you carry. And that is why the love that returns from the fire multiplied is not simply a reward for your personal benefit. It is a resource for the people around you who are still trying to find their footing in the middle of what they are walking through. The expanded love that the fire produced in you is the very thing that will allow you to be present with other people's pain in a way that does not flinch, that does not reach too quickly for the resolution, that does not try to rush someone out of their difficulty before the difficulty has finished doing what it was designed to do in them. Because you know from the inside how important it is to have someone who can sit with you in the fire without demanding that you exit it before you are ready. You know how rare and how precious it is to encounter a presence that does not require your situation to be resolved before it can fully show up for you. And because you know that from experience, you are now able to offer it to others in a way that carries the full weight of genuine understanding. The multiplication of love after the fire is also visible in the way chosen ones begin to relate to the God who allowed the fire in the first place. Because one of the most significant things that happens when love survives a genuine test is that the relationship in which it was tested deepens in a way that comfortable seasons simply cannot produce. There is an intimacy that develops between a chosen one and God through the seasons of fire and silence that has a different quality from the intimacy of the easy seasons. It is the intimacy of two parties who have been through something together, of a person who called out to God in the darkest hours of their experience and found, even when the finding felt uncertain and the evidence was thin, that God was present in the darkness with them. That discovery, the discovery that God does not abandon his chosen ones in the fire, but enters the fire with them, changes the relationship permanently. It creates a depth of trust that cannot be manufactured through religious performance or accumulated through doctrinal knowledge. It can only be grown through the actual experience of being held in the place that should have undone you, and finding that the holding was real. Joseph's relationship with God after the prison was not the same relationship he had before the pit. It was deeper. It was more tested. It was anchored in the specific, personal, undeniable evidence of a God who had been present through every season of the journey, working through every moment that looked like disaster toward a conclusion, that vindicated every choice Joseph had made to keep trusting, to keep loving, to keep using the gift in a context that offered no visible reward for doing so. The love that Joseph carried for God on the other side of everything he walked through was multiplied. It was larger than the love he had at the beginning, not because it had been inflated by positive emotional experiences, but because it had been proven by the fire and found to be genuine. And genuine love that has been proven has a weight to it, a settled authority, a quiet confidence that untested love simply does not possess. You are standing in the early days of that multiplication. You may not yet be able to feel the full dimensions of what has been growing in you through the seasons you have walked through, because the fire is still recent enough that what is most present to you is the memory of the heat, rather than the clarity of what the heat produced. But it is being produced right now, in the interior spaces where God does his most significant work in the lives of the people he has chosen. The multiplication is happening. The love that went into the fire as something genuine, but still limited by the unexpanded capacity of a life that had not yet been fully tested, is coming out of the fire as something that has grown beyond the boundaries it used to operate within. And that expanded love, as it becomes more fully yours to steward and to release into the world around you, is going to touch things in ways that will make the cost of the fire feel, in retrospect, like the most reasonable exchange you were ever invited to make. The relationships in your life that are on the other side of this season will carry a different quality than the relationships that existed before the fire came. Because the version of you that enters those relationships, the love refined, fire-proven, identity established, carrying version of you that is emerging from everything you have walked through, that version of you has a capacity for genuine connection that the earlier version did not fully possess. You will be able to be present in other people's lives at a depth that requires you to have been somewhere. You will be able to offer a quality of understanding and compassion and patient presence that can only be given by someone who has genuinely received it in their own hardest moments. And the people who encounter you in this next season of your life will find themselves in the presence of someone who has been through the fire and come out carrying something that the fire, for all its ferocity, was never able to burn. There is also something that happens in the broader scope of a chosen one's life when the love returns multiplied from the fire. The vision expands, the capacity to see beyond the immediate circumstances into the larger movement of what God is doing across time and through the connected stories of the people he has chosen. That capacity grows in proportion to the depth of the fire that was endured and survived. Joseph, standing on the other side of everything he walked through, could see with a clarity that none of the people around him possessed that what had looked like the destruction of a life was actually the construction of a salvation. Not just for himself, for a generation, for the physical preservation of the people through whom the promise of God to Abraham was going to be fulfilled. He could see the architecture of the divine plan from a vantage point that the fire had given him, a vantage point that was simply not accessible to anyone who had not been where he had been. Song of Solomon chapter 8 verse 6 says, Love is as strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. The love that has been burning in you through every season of your testing, through every moment of the fire, and every stretch of the silence, and every day of the waiting. That love is as strong as death. It could not be extinguished by what you walked through. It could not be buried under the weight of everything that was piled on top of it. In the seasons when heaven seemed quiet and the circumstances seemed to argue against every promise you had ever received, it burned through all of it, not with the bright, consuming intensity of a fire that flares and fades, but with the steady, unyielding, unquenchable consistency of a flame that has found its source in something deeper than emotion and more permanent than circumstance. That is the love you carry. That is the love that passed the test. And that love, returning to you now multiplied and refined and ready to be released into its full purpose, is one of the most powerful things currently moving on the earth. Because chosen ones who love at this depth, who have been through enough to have their love proven rather than simply declared, are the people through whom God is rebuilding what has been broken in the world around them. They are the ones whose presence changes atmospheres, whose words carry the specific gravity of someone who has been somewhere real and come back carrying something true, whose lives serve as the living evidence that the fire does not have the final word, that the silence was not abandonment, that the test was always designed to be passed, and that the love that survives everything it is asked to survive comes back carrying more than it left with. You are that evidence. You are that love. And what comes next in your story is going to be shaped by the fullness of what the fire has produced in you, not despite what you walked through, but because of it, and because of the God who was present in every moment of it, working toward exactly this. You have arrived at something. Not the end of a message, not the conclusion of a listening experience that will fade into the background noise of the day the moment this voice goes quiet, but the threshold of a new chapter in a story that has been building toward this moment, longer than you may fully realize. Everything that was spoken over you in the sections that came before this one was not information delivered to a passive recipient. It was truth deposited into a chosen one who was ready to receive it, ready to carry it, ready to step forward into the season that has been waiting on the other side of everything you walked through to arrive at this exact point of readiness. And that readiness, which you may not yet fully feel in the way you imagine readiness is supposed to feel, is real. It is present. It is the product of every season of formation you have been through, every moment of the fire, every stretch of the silence, every day of carrying the dream in a context that offered you no visible reason to keep carrying it. Joseph stepped out of the prison into the palace not because he suddenly felt ready, not because the years of preparation had assembled themselves in his interior life into a clear and confident sense of qualification. He stepped forward because the moment had come, because God's timing had arrived at the precise point where everything that had been built in Joseph, through everything he had been through, was exactly what the moment required. And the Joseph who walked into that throne room was not performing readiness, he was carrying it in his bones, in the depth of his character, in the quality of his presence, in the settled, unshakable knowing of a man who had been in the fire and the silence and the prison, and had come out the other side, still carrying the God who gave it, still open to the moment when everything that had been prepared in him would finally be fully deployed. That is where you are standing today, not at the beginning of the preparation, not in the middle of the fire, at the threshold, At the place where the door is opening in front of you and the invitation being extended is not to more endurance, but to more fullness. Not to more waiting, but to more stepping. Not to the continued carrying of something in the dark, but to the releasing of it into the light. The season that is opening before you is the season in which what was built in you through the hardest chapters of your story begins to find its full expression in the world around you. And the world around you, whether it knows it or not, has been waiting for exactly what you are about to bring into it. You were tested and you passed. Let that be the settled truth underneath everything that comes next, not as a source of pride that elevates you above others, but as a foundation of confidence that stabilizes you when the next challenge arrives. Because challenges will come in the next season too, not because you have failed or because God has withdrawn his hand from your life, but because chosen ones who are operating in their fullness are always going to be opposed by forces that understand what is at stake when a person fully steps into the assignment they were designed to carry. The opposition is not evidence of divine displeasure. It is evidence of spiritual significance. And you have already demonstrated, through everything you walked through in the seasons behind you, that you know how to carry the calling through the opposition without losing the love or abandoning the dream or accepting the diminished identity that the opposition was designed to press you into accepting. The door that is opening in front of you right now, the one that no human hand can shut, because it is being opened by the God who holds the keys to every significant threshold in the life of a chosen one. That door leads into a season that is going to require all of you, not the performed version of you, not the version that has been carefully constructed to be acceptable to the audiences in your life, whose approval has sometimes felt more necessary than it actually is. All of you. The real, fire refined, love proven, identity established, reward carrying, fully formed version of the person that God designed before the foundation of the world and has been building toward through every single season of your life, easy and hard alike. That person is who is being called forward through this door. And that person, as it turns out, is exactly who you are. Before this message closes, before the final words are spoken and the space returns to silence, there is something that needs to happen. Not as a religious ritual, not as a performance for anyone who might be watching, but as a genuine, personal, interior act between you and the God who has been present through every moment of everything you have walked through. A prayer, not an elaborate one, not one that requires special language or special posture, or a level of spiritual sophistication that you may or may not feel you currently possess. Just an honest conversation with the one who has known you since before your beginning, and who is standing at the threshold of your next chapter, with his hand extended, ready to walk you through the door that has been waiting for this moment to open. So wherever you are right now, in whatever physical space you occupy, allow yourself to be present in this moment. Not distracted by what's next on your schedule, not half present with your attention already moving toward the next thing here, now, in this quiet, significant threshold moment. And if you are willing, let these words be yours. God, I am here, not because I have it all together, not because I have walked every step of this journey perfectly, or without doubt, or without the moments in which I wondered whether you were still paying attention to what was happening in my life. I am here because something in me refused to let go of the truth that you placed inside me before I was born. I am here because the love survived, not because I am extraordinary, but because you are faithful, and because what you place in a person cannot be extracted by anything this world or the enemy of my soul has ever attempted to bring against it. I want to thank you for the fire, I know that sounds strange to say, and I could not have said it in the middle of the burning. But standing here on this side of it, I can see that the fire was not your absence. It was your most intimate presence, working at the level of my character that nothing else could have reached. I want to thank you for the silence, for the seasons in which you quieted the noise around me so that the deeper things could be deposited without interference. For the waiting that felt like abandonment, but was actually appointment. For every moment in which you were building something in me that I could not yet see, but that you had already finished in your mind before the construction began. I receive what you have been saying about me. I receive the identity that was established before I had the opportunity to either earn or disqualify it. I receive the calling that was sealed inside me before the world had a chance to tell me who I was or was not capable of becoming. I received the reward that was being built through the trial, the expanded love, the refined character, the depth of wisdom and compassion that can only be grown through genuine suffering, genuinely survived. I receive all of it, and I step forward through the door that you are opening in front of me, not in my own strength, but in the strength that the fire produced, not in my own wisdom, but in the wisdom that the silence grew, not in my own confidence, but in the settled knowing of a chosen one who has been proven and found faithful by a God who never makes mistakes about the people he selects for the assignments he has in mind. Go before me into what comes next. Let every room I enter be changed by the quality of presence that you have been building in me through everything I walked through. Let the love that survived the fire flow outward from my life in a way that reaches the people who are still in their own fire and still trying to believe that the love is worth maintaining when the maintaining costs everything. Let the testimony of my survival become the courage that another chosen one needs to keep going in the season they are currently walking through. Let what was built in me become an inheritance for the people who come after me, a demonstration that the chosen ones who trust you do not come through the fire diminished, they come through it multiplied. Amen. That prayer, however quietly you received it, however privately it landed in the interior of who you are, was heard. Not because of the eloquence of the words, not because of any religious formula that was correctly executed, but because the God who set you apart before your birth and has been present through every moment of your story has never, not for a single second, stopped listening for your voice. And when a chosen one speaks honestly, from the place of everything they have been through and everything they are still believing for, heaven leans in with a quality of attentiveness that the most sophisticated human audience could never replicate. You are released into your next. That is the declaration being spoken over you in this moment. Not released from the challenges that will accompany the calling. Not released into a season of comfort that requires nothing from you and costs you nothing and asks nothing of the character that was built through the fire. Released into the fullness of who you were always designed to be and what you were always designed to carry and where you were always designed to go. The test is complete. The verdict was rendered in your favor before the test began, by a God who knew what you were made of before the fire ever touched you, and who designed the fire specifically to reveal it. The chosen one who arrived at the beginning of this message and the chosen one who is standing at the end of it are not standing in the same place. Something has shifted. Something has been established. Something has been declared over you by heaven that is now settled in the invisible realm, in a way that will begin showing up in the visible one with an increasing clarity and consistency as you step forward through the door that is opening in front of you. If this message reached you today, If it spoke to something real in the interior of your life and left you standing in a different place than where you began, then let it reach someone else. Share it with the person whose face came to your mind somewhere in the middle of what was being said. Like this video as your agreement that what was spoken here today was worth affirming. Subscribe to this channel so that you remain connected to the consistent flow of messages being created for chosen ones who are navigating the complexity of living a called life in a world that does not always understand what they are carrying. And if you feel moved to support the continuation of this work, the link in the pinned comment and the description of this video will take you to a place where that support can be expressed. Every contribution, regardless of its size, is an act of partnership in something that heaven considers significant. You are chosen. You have been tested. You have passed. And what comes next in your story is going to be worth every moment of everything it took to get here. Go forward. Heaven is with you.